Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to have Dr. Rick Hanson join us today. He is a psychologist. He is a senior fellow at the Greater Good Science at UC Berkeley, and he's also a New York Times bestselling author. He's written Resilient, Hardwiring Happiness, and Buddha's Brain. Hi,
Thank
Rick.
you. Hi there, and I'd like to get a word in on a book I just finished and I'm in love with, and it'll come out in May 2020. It's called Neurodharma, New Science, Ancient Wisdom, and 7 Practices of the Highest Happiness. So I want to add Neurodharma to that list. It's my 6th book, actually, at this point.
Maybe we could start by talking about Neurodharma.
Oh, that caught your attention.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about Neurodharma.
Well, the basic idea is to take all the different practices to get to the mountain of awakening, right? And to draw on the Buddhist roadmap of the mind to identify what's the most effective things that we can do informed by modern science. So this is not a book for Buddhists per se. It really draws on the Buddhist model of the mind, which is a very penetrating model and not mystical or metaphysical, and then inform it by science by asking ourselves, what's going on in the brain when our minds are really steady, our hearts are really open, we feel balanced and equanimous with a sense of contentment. Those are the first 3 of 7 practices: steadiness of mind, warmth of heart, balanced equanimity. And then also what's happening in the brain when we have a sense of non-dual wholeness, rested right in the present moment, connected to everything. Those are the next 3. And even what could be happening in the brain as we engage what some call the unconditioned, the deathless, the eternal, even the transcendental. I call that timelessness. So those are the 7 practices. And what the book's about is the new science of how to strengthen the circuitry of those 7 ways of being so that increasingly we embody them. It's pretty cool stuff.
Fascinating. I'm curious too, Rick, is there a way of being in different parts of our brain? There are different practices that we can engage in, from mindfulness to meditation to prayer. And how do these different practices activate the parts of the brain or even the body?
Yeah.
And what do you find to be effective?
Well, it's a great question. And first, what the science tells us is that our experiences depend upon what our body is doing. And that's true for us, for a cat. The experiences of a cat or a squirrel depend on what the body of that creature is doing, especially its nervous system, and in particular, its brain. So when we speak of the brain, it's because it's the primary local source of the hearing, the seeing, the remembering, the intuiting, the enjoying, the suffering that we're experiencing in the moment. But what's happening in the brain is, of course, part of a larger network of factors in the body as a whole, and then reaching out into life and culture and nature and back into deep time. So all that's true. But that said, now I'm going to talk about what's happening in the 3 pounds of tofu inside the coconut. Different parts of the brain do different things, just like different parts of your body do different things. And so when people are engaged with different kinds of, let's say, meditative practice, so let's contrast a sense of mindful concentration on the sensations of breathing, classic meditation, contrast that with, let's say, practices of bhakti or devotion or strong feelings of compassion and kindness radiating in all directions, or a sense of tuning into the love of Christ, for example, as a form of prayer. All right. Acknowledging that whatever might be going on outside of ordinary reality, whatever that part is, inside ordinary reality, for example, when a person is doing a focused meditation on the breath practice, they tend to be engaging parts of the brain right behind the forehead, the executive regions of the brain that exercise kind of top-down control, and including a part of the brain called the anterior, which just means frontal, cingulate cortex, there are two of these, but they're spoken of typically in the singular. They're kind of in the middle of the brain, kind of starting behind the forehead. And that part of the brain, the singular cortex, keeps us focused. So you can imagine right there that what you're doing when you're staying focused on the sensations of breathing is you're working the muscles in the brain, as it were, that are engaged with things like focus and deliberate sustaining of a task, as well as some parts of the brain that are tuning into the sensations of breathing, such as in the insula, on the inside of the temporal lobes. That's how we tune into the interior of our body. And as you repeatedly stimulate those parts of the brain, you're going to strengthen them, like working a muscle. So they get literally bigger. And research shows, MRIs and other kinds of findings, that when people repeatedly practice those kinds of meditations, they build up tissue and they strengthen systems in the parts of the brain that do that. On the other hand, if someone's doing something very heartfelt and devotional, they're going to use a little bit of these executive regions behind the forehead just to sustain the focus. But a lot of what they're engaging are pleasure systems in the brain, frankly, that are involved with heartfelt feelings, natural opioids, oxytocin, and subcortical regions of the brain that kind of sit beneath the modern neocortex, which is like the outside cap of the brain. Under that cap are more ancient regions like the amygdala and the hippocampus that started emerging around 200 million years ago. And those parts of the brain will be more active if you're doing a devotional practice. And with time, those too become more strengthened. So people develop the habit of unconditional love, universal compassion, as well as potentially the habit of being courageous and heartfelt, therefore, courageous on your own behalf.
Mm-hmm. So could you intentionally hang out in different parts in your brain during practice? Because it seems most of us are in that frontal part of the brain, but by pulling it back and maybe going a little bit back in the brain, perhaps that could change one's perspective. And to add something else,
Yeah.
it seems that women and men have differences in their brain, and that men tend to gravitate towards certain kind of mindfulness practices. And women really love like visualization and creativity and prayer, manifestation. There seems to be this bias, and I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about that.
Well, you're getting at a series of wonderful and so useful questions. I mean, they're trippy and fascinating and cool just to sort of geek out about, right? And think about, but they're also deeply relevant to practice. So I'll take the way you said it and I'll say it a little carefully, which is as we engage different experiences, such as moving from a kind of steady attention to a neutral object, such as the sensations of breathing, as we shift our experience from that, and maybe we do that for the first 5 or 10 minutes to just kind of stabilize a feeling of presence. Then as we move from that, let's say, to a more expansive sense of things as a whole, we're going to be working parts of our brain more toward the back that are involved with softening the boundaries between the self and the world. And let's say also, we bring in very heartfelt feelings. Maybe we put a hand on our heart. Maybe we bring to mind people we love or the feeling of being loved. And then we start really working a practice of, let's say, devotion, sending loving kindness in all directions. Let's suppose we do that. Well, yeah, as our sense of experience changes, we are going to be shifting patterns of activation in the brain. In the larger context in which the brain is continually, all parts of it are working together. So these shifts are really ones of emphasis and degrees of activation, but they're still significant because if our sense of experience changes, if our state of consciousness changes, what's going on in the brain and therefore in the body altogether must be changing as well. So that's really, really true. And as we train, as we practice, there's a traditional saying, your mind takes its shape from what it rests upon. Well, if you repeatedly rest upon worries and regrets and resentments, your brain will take a kind of stressed out shape. I'm putting shape in air quotes here. On the other hand, if you repeatedly rest your attention on a sense of peace and a sense of calm at the core, even amidst holiday madness or just everyday life, right? As you repeatedly rest your awareness on a feeling of resilient well-being. You're dealing with things around the edges, maybe you're frazzled, but in the core of your being, I talk about it as the green zone. You're in deep green in the core of your being. That increasingly becomes your habit. It increasingly becomes your ground of being internally, and it gets strengthened by living there increasingly. Now, men and women, whoa, that's a can of worms.
Okay.
For all kinds of reasons, gender itself is very fluid categories, and then there's always the question, nature and nurture, how much of these differences that we do see in adult men and women,
Mhm.
often on average, or how much of those differences are based on just socialization and culture, and how much of those are based on genuine, innate, biological, inherent differences. There's
Mhm.
probably a lot of overlap
Yeah,
between the
totally.
bell curve of women and the bell curve of men with regard to any of these qualities. That said, yeah, I've definitely observed, as you have as well, that this is really kind of tricky to talk about, but I think definitely men tend to be drawn toward practices that are, sort of analytical and involve control. Women, my experience, tend to be more drawn to practices that have a heartfelt quality to them. Uh, my feeling is, as all the great teachers have laid out, it's an integrated path, whatever path you take. And the paths tend to converge as we approach the top of the mountain. In other words, someone who is a mature secular Buddhist has a lot of, 20, 30 years of practice, gone on a lot of retreats, uh, but in a very secular kind of way. That person's going to seem a lot like a Christian monastic who's been living in silence for 20 years when you really look closely at what they experience and how they are in the world. So as you converge, as you approach excellence in any domain, gymnastics, being a stockbroker, or being an evolved practitioner, people start looking more and more similar as you kind of converge on the ultimate. And that's probably true in their brains as well.
Oh, very interesting. Rick, I wanted to ask you about the difference between stress and anxiety
Mm-hmm.
and why we're hardwired for negativity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that so many people do experience this low grade stress and anxiety that
Yeah.
it's their normal.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they don't even acknowledge that they have
Yeah.
this. So, how would just a regular person know and make those distinctions and then empower themselves to start changing?
All right.
I don't know.
That's good.
I know
What
we have a
there?
short time together, so I'm trying to pack it
Yeah,
all in.
yeah. Let's do it. All right, really fast.
Let's
So,
go.
stress is a tricky word, and it's really important because stressors do not necessarily equal stress. And a lot of what we're trying to do in life, if we're engaged in the world, is deal with challenges without getting stressed about it. And in dealing with challenges like a 60-hour work week, or raising young children, or dealing with aging parents with health issues, or grappling with current American politics, whatever it might be, or keeping a business afloat, whatever the challenge is, we're going to be engaged with these challenges. The question is, can we maintain kind of an even keel as we deal with them? So just because there are stressors does not necessarily mean a person is stressed. And the key difference is the nature of the emotions the person is having at the time. If you're revved up and you feel happy and enthusiastic and passionate and clear and strong and intense, you're not stressed. Your body's kind of revved up, but you're not accumulating a lot of wear and tear. On the other hand, if you're revved up while feeling driven and contracted and pressured and irritable and worried and exasperated and frustrated, then you're going to be stressed. So, really important difference. Stress itself is not good for us. People who say being stressed doesn't matter, it's how you think about it. Well, if the way you think about your challenges helps you be not stressed, that's useful.
Mhm.
Okay. Uh, but If you're really stressed in the way I'm describing, and you're just telling yourself, oh, it's fine that I'm cranky and pressured and revved up and full of cortisol, my heart's beating faster than it needs to, and my body's inflamed because stress is inflammatory, but that's all fine. No, that's terribly wrong. And you're gradually accumulating a health debt that you'll eventually have to pay with, especially as you get older, with greater morbidity, more health issues, and greater mortality, a shorter lifespan. So stress itself is not great. People should be clear about that. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be stressed some of the time. Sometimes we're going to be stressed, but try to keep it to a minimum. So stress. Anxiety is stressful because it's a negative emotion. So there's a feeling of anxiety is uncomfortable. Now there are ways to be stressed that don't involve anxiety. Like in a moment, someone's very angry and aggressive and combative. Maybe they don't feel anxious in the moment. They're still stressed. So there are different forms of stress that may or may not involve anxiety. But deep down, anxiety predisposes us to stress because if we're usually anxious about what might happen, and so if we're anxious about it, then if it does happen, we're more inclined to have a big reaction to it. The thing I would say in general is that in terms of your kind of tail question, what can we do about it? The way I think about this is what do we do in the moment? And then what do we do to prepare for the moment? What we do to prepare for the moment is the most important. And that's where regular practices like you teach or others teach of meditation and contemplation, yoga, therapy, just reflection, or, a kind of determined day after day accumulation of key inner strengths like resilience or sense of worth or self-compassion, the cultivation of these inner resources before the oatmeal hits the fan. That's good. Because then when things happen, when your partner gives you that look like, heck with you, or you're, late and you're stuck in traffic, late for a meeting, when events actually happen, because you've trained, you've in simple ways, 5, 10, 20 minutes a day. It's the level of the training that most people actually really do consistently. When you've prepared yourself over time, and you've cultivated inner strengths of mindfulness and compassion and resilience and happiness, well, then when things happen, they don't land so hard. Now, when things are happening, there are also things you can do. And I have kind of my quick first aid kit if you want to know it. Number one, notice that you're upset. That's 50% of it right there. And when you notice you're upset, see if you can get a little distance from it. Be mindful of it. Step back from it. Rather than being completely sucked into the movie, try to witness it from 20 rows back. All right. That right there is enormous. So notice you're upset. Maybe even name it to yourself. Irritated, stunned, so angry, really hurt, wondering what to do. You're just naming it. You're not getting caught up in it. You're just noting it. You're naming it. Research shows actually that simple practice of noting calms down activity in the amygdala, the alarm bell of the brain, and increases activity in the prefrontal cortex, which, as I said earlier, is sort of the seat of executive top-down regulation, so you can kind of get a grip on things. Just right there. Name to yourself what you're feeling and be with it. Great. Second, self-compassion. A sense of support and warmth for yourself. Ouch, it hurts, right? Like, oh, a feeling you'd have for a friend. Oh, I wish you weren't feeling that. It's part of life, and ouch, that hurts. We don't, we wouldn't want that. It hurts. And there's a sense of caring for yourself. That's self-compassion. Third thing I think that's really important, maybe especially, frankly, for women to generalize it, is to tune into a muscular sense of being on your own side, of being for yourself, not against others, but that you matter too. And there's a kind of muscular, nope, I'm going to figure this out. This is not good. We're going to do something about this, if only inside my own mind. Maybe all I'm going to do is let this go by because I know that person's kind of a jerk and never going to change. But inside my mind, I'm making some decisions here, or I'm developing some reflections, or I'm reminding myself, maybe this person is not a jerk. they just said that because they're ignorant, or they didn't know better, or it's not a big deal and I don't need to be so upset about it next time. Whatever. But you're taking action on your own behalf, that muscular feeling. And then you make a plan. So
Mhm.
for me, those are the four things: recognition that something's really bothering me, and a mindful awareness of it. Second, warm-hearted support for yourself. Third, a kind of muscular getting on your own side, being for yourself. It's shocking how many people do not have easy access to that experience, that inner resource for themselves of being on their own side. And then fourth, start making a plan. Action binds anxiety. If you know what you're going to do, if only the next time this happens, then it'll help you feel a lot better.
Mhm. Well, those are amazing tools, Rick. I mean, when you talk about, if we were to see the universe as this big brain and the way that we're living today, and you talk about some of these tools to kind of bring yourself out of that old default state,
Mm-hmm.
because I think a lot of people just feel like they're in a constant stress, depressed state, and it's
Mm-hmm.
something that they don't have the resource or they don't feel connected to
Yeah.
getting out of, because a lot of times people live in this isolated kind of way. Now we have so much technology, we have a lot of people, and then today the way we communicate is now ghosting is normal. You don't have to deal with anybody.
Yeah.
So now there's these new ways of communication, these different ways of communication, different ways of living and lifestyle. So how do we in essence develop this bigger brain within our community to help create these positive pathways? Because that's what I tend to see, is that people feel really alone and isolated in their personal and spiritual path,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't know how to kind of come out of that. Do you have thoughts about that? Just the way we're set up and the way we're communicating now, and
Yeah, I
how
do.
impacting our
And
feelings of loneliness, depression, and isolation,
yeah,
anxiety. Hmm.
yeah. Well, first, with regard to people doing things online, there are ways to use online activities to actually feel closer to others. And so, for example, I have several online programs that all have opportunities to chat with others about what's happening for you in the online program. And these programs are different scale. Some of them are very quick, bite-sized things you can do in less than 2 minutes at a time. Others are more like a 1-year personal transformation journey. And people can see more about them at my website, rickhanson.net. But inside those, and we have scholarships too for people. Inside those, there are plenty of opportunities for people to connect with others. So I think that's one thing to do. But beyond that, I think a lot about our true nature at a lot of levels. And uh, biologically, our true nature is to live with 50 other people our entire life in a hunter-gatherer band. That's our true nature. And that's how, over most of 300,000 years, our immediate human ancestors lived. It's how, for another 2 million years before that, our tool manufacturing hominid ancestors lived, also in these small bands. And you just think about what life is like in a small band. You and I are looking at each other now through a screen, but at least we're looking at each other. And in those bands, we'd be looking at each other and touching each other and interacting with each other and taking care of each other's children and being with each other's parents as they died. I mean, we would be doing that our entire lives. And that's our true nature. It's to live in close contact with other humans, to rely upon them, and to share this journey in life with them. That's our true nature. And so we can't go back to the Stone Age, but as much as we can, we could try to compensate for those tendencies of modern technological civilizations that uh, pull us away from our own true nature. So, for example, as you go through the day, making eye contact with people, strangers on the street, making sure that your smile is a genuine smile. A lot of people do a phony smile these days. It's so weird. It's as if they think other people are not looking. Like, I'll do a phony smile. Ready? It's creepy.
Hmm.
The eyes don't change.
Mhm.
But
That's
they're
the thing. A lot of people don't know how to smile. I feel like there's a lot of seriousness, and it's almost like hard for people to break into that joyful, more fun and playful state. And
yeah.
that to me seems like the antidote to stress and anxiety, which
In
is
a
just
lot of ways, one of the
silly.
fastest way to get out of the stress bubble,
Yeah.
exactly, is to move into positive emotion, including emotional connection with others. Exactly right. So, what I do, I try to take a few extra seconds to get a feeling for the other person.
Mhm.
The person, the hot dog vendor, the person making your coffee, the person driving the Uber, the person that is, you know, at a desk next to you in your work, to actually get a feeling of them. And when we are getting a feeling of them, they will feel felt, which is a gift to both of us. So I think it's useful to look for many little opportunities, brief ones typically, as you go through your day, to experience more of a feeling of contact with other people, including in small ways. I think that's really important. I think another thing is to regulate yourself so you're not harming others and you're holding them in your heart. Like, for example, here, we don't know each other well. We kind of just sort of met a little while ago. The relationship is what it is, but inside that, whatever you do, I'm going to keep you in my heart. I'm going to take you into account. And knowing that, one, morally, helps me not harm you so much, if at all. But two, it's good for me. So, one other way we can feel connected to others in ways that are self nurturing as well as other beneficial is to carry other people with us in our feeling. You know, that's a great way to feel connected, and no one can stop you from doing that.
Mhm. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Rick. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, totally my pleasure. And if I could just add one little thing, it's actually a quotation, it's a parable, proverb actually. The proverb says, "Think not lightly of good, saying, it will not come to me. Drop by drop is the water pot filled. Likewise, the wise one, gathering it little by little, fills oneself with good." And that's our opportunity every day to look for the little things, the little moments of calming, the little moments of feeling strong, the little moments of letting go of some needless exasperation or worry, the little moments of insight into our own minds, the little moments of love for other people. To look for those little moments, those little drops, and slow down for a breath or two or three, just to marinate in that experience, which will help to hardwire the emotional residues of that experience into your own nervous system. So gradually over time, lifting your mood, lifting your inner strength, and lifting your own level of consciousness over time. That's a simple practice grounded in science that people can do a few minutes a day. A breath here, 3 breaths there, half a dozen times a day. Really take in the good. And that will help you in the moment. It'll change your day because you'll be looking for the good that you can take in, including the sense of your own natural goodness, your own fundamental value and worth as a being. You'll be looking for times you can take that in, and it'll change your life because you will gradually be growing the good inside yourself for your sake as well as for other beings.
That's beautiful, Rick. I mean, from what I hear in that parable too, it sounds like virtue is a quality to develop that helps you also develop resilience and
Mhm.
compassion, and
Yeah,
especially even resilience to stress and this quality of inner
yeah.
virtue and
They're
learning.
exactly right. And one of the things we take in is happiness, gratitude, reassurance, delight, amazement, feeling of beauty, listening to music. Yeah,
Hmm.
good.
Thank you
Well,
so
and the happiness that we experience with others, like I am with you.
much. Thank you so much, Rick. And again, if you want to learn more about Rick's work, go to his website, rickhanson.net. And Rick, thank you so
Oh,
much.
bows back to
Appreciate your
you.
time. Yeah.
Oh, my pleasure. And
Wonderful rest of your day. It's been a pleasure meeting you. And I hope to talk to you again.
oh, it'll be great. It'll be great. Keep practicing, drop by drop. Keep
We
drip,
will.
keep dripping those drops. All right, you
We
take
will.
good care.